Hi everyone. The second talk on accessibility today, and why not have multiple, because it's quite an important subject. And luckily the topic of mine is a bit different than the previous one you heard, and also contains probably less swearing. And it's called the 5 stages of embracing accessibility, and you'll get to know why in a bit. But first things first, let me introduce a bit about myself. So I'm Koen. I'm of average height. I have a short beard. I'm standing here in, well, not entirely coincidental, my company colors. I'm a woodworker in my off time. I love to do climbing, mainly bouldering for the past few decades, and I'm a father to 2 lovely daughters, and you can see that combined in this picture. But what is interesting in all of these things that I love to do is that you're always looking for a creative solution, and sometimes you mess up, and it's important to realize that's okay. And it's also important to realize that no one knows exactly what they're doing in all of these things. And that's also what I love about UX, and why I became, a UX strategist now. So I used to be a UX designer, and I started working as a UX strategist in the Dutch railways, the Nederlandse Spoorwegen, about a year back. And when I started working there, I was immediately confronted with a pretty big challenge that was ahead of us, and that was accessibility. So before I dive into the specifics of what I want to tell you, it's important to realize a few things, and a few have been shared in several talks already. But it's good to realize again that it's not just permanent disabilities we're talking about, like someone that has lost or has lost sight or is deaf, for example. It's also about temporary disabilities. I mean, who of you has once in their life broken something, a leg, a wrist? Yeah. Quite a lot, yeah. Now, who in his life or in the past week has had, for example, 6 grocery bags in their hands, or maybe like a small baby on its arm? I mean, I know I have, because I have a 2-year-old that refuses to walk all the time. And when you try to interact with, for example, your phone while carrying your daughter while there's a lot of noise in the supermarket, for example, that's a moment that I think everyone can benefit in some way of a more accessible product. Now, the second thing that's important to realize, and not specifically for this crowd probably, but that it's not just for designers. And although this is a subject that's usually dumped on the plate of a designer or a design systems team, you need everyone in an organization to line up and to really want to make this change in the organization and to create accessible products. And there's like a ton of resources on this. So the WCAG is the most extensive one that really describes what is necessary to make a digital product accessible. I mean, Hayden gave a really nice talk with some important lessons that you can draw from certain parts of life. And I'll get back to why that's important for my talk. But what's also good to realize is that although, for example, in the US, accessibility has been written into law for, I think, decades actually now, the UK also has pretty extensive legislation on accessibility. It now has finally been written into comprehensive EU law in the form of the European Accessibility Act, which is what makes it like a very high priority topic for a lot of Dutch companies, but also companies throughout the European Union. So it's time to comply. I mean, that was a challenge that was given to me when I started working at the Dutch railways. So I looked, okay, what do we have as an organization? Well, first of all, we have our heart in the right place. And that means that if you ask anyone in our organization why they work where they work, it's not about the money, because what we do is usually, if you work at a financial institution, for example, you earn way more. It's about making an impact on actually like the whole country. and doing so sustainably. And we have an awesome internal team for accessibility, and I've heard that multiple times today, which is also awesome. And our team for accessibility actually has a pretty big challenge because, well, our main product is driving trains. And that means there's a lot of accessibility issues to think about. So they're also concerned with, for example, the lines on the ground that people with a, I'm not sure what to call it, but an assistive stick, well, yeah, for lack of a better word, can use. They are concerned with, for example, how do you get people into trains that do not align with the platform? And now that this legislation is coming into place, they're looking for help on the digital area. And then we have a great design system, which Michelle already mentioned. It's called Nessie. And that actually works brilliant. And the adoption is, well, we've had our struggles, but it's going quite well there. And we have a dozen motivated product teams that really care about our users. And we have me, an enthusiastic design strategist. So the question was, we have all these great things, now what do we do? Which brings me to the actual topic of my talk, and that's DesignOps and accessibility. So everyone has their work cut out. There's these resources that tell you if you want to do this right as a designer, these are the things that you need to do. If you want to do this right as a content specialist, you need to conform to these guidelines, for example. A developer should watch these kind of things. But as with many topics that we pick up as designers, there's a lot of organizational challenges that you're faced with. And especially a subject like this, when this is dropped on your plate, you immediately run into these barriers. Now, I don't have the answers, but I will reflect on, well, my past year and what I encountered. And I will do so through the lens of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross' 5 stages of grief. I don't know if you, probably most of you know them all, or maybe a few, but don't worry, I'll walk you right through them. Because the first stage is denial. And just like maybe a patient that has been diagnosed with a severe disease denies the weight of that diagnosis, maybe at first, companies tend to really deny the impact that accessible products will have. I mean, we're not getting any complaints, so the product must be fine the way it is, or we don't really have that many disabled users. Now, when I picked up this topic at NS, that was not really a problem, but apparently not anymore, because for the past 10 years, the team that's concerned with accessibility already had been lobbying for this subject for all the time. But I spoke to someone that could still remember, like a top manager saying, like a decade back, yeah, but don't those people just take like the small fans everywhere? That's a pretty serious remark to make right there. So what do you do to actually get over this phase? And what you do is what you mostly do when a big challenge is in front of you, and you start with the why. So for NS, there's 3 main reasons, and the first one is glaringly obvious because it's in our DNA. I told you about the reason that people work with us, but it's actually also in our mission. Together we'll make the Netherlands accessible for everyone. And then secondly, it affects quite a lot of people. Like if we look at permanent physical disabilities, you're talking about 1 to 1.5 million people in the Netherlands. Then if you look at cognitive disabilities, you can add, 2 to 2.5 million more people. Then if you take into account temporary disabilities, I don't know how big that number would be, situational disabilities, and in the end, most people would benefit at some point in time with more accessible products. And then finally is the law, as I told you, which is like the most extrinsic motivation to get this right. But at the same time, it's good to realize that apparently, democratically, we think that this is an important thing that we need to do. And the second thing that really helps in this phase, in this stage, is to cultivate empathy. I think I heard a good comment earlier, and let's make that a little less crude, but if you put on a blindfold and you pick up one of those sticks and you start walking through the station, that's not the same as someone that is, for example, blind and does it every day. And the same, we do a lot of testing at NS, and we ask our teams to test with screen readers. But since none of those people actually have a severe loss of sight, that's really not the same. So it's good to have, for example, people over that can tell you, first of all, what your product means to them. So one anecdote I have is that a dad came up to me after a talk I did on accessibility, and he said, my daughter is 16 now. She's been born with a brain impairment that left her blind since birth. And since she's 16, I mean, she has like a load of social contact, but everything is online. She has been, for the past years, basically living in her room because her world exists online. But, you know, as you get older, it's also nice to find more of a physical connection. And what they did is they went out to the station as a family and explored how do you actually navigate this space. And she uses the app to do that. She uses, but she can do it completely by her own. She can now travel to her grandparents, for example. And she expanded that to 1 or 2 friends. So now she goes out a few times a week. And that's the impact that we get to make as a company, that our product gets to make. What's also good is to realize not just on a product level what the impact is, but also how a disability impacts daily life. And not just in a negative ways, like what are the boundaries that you run into. But this person that's sitting here, he came by, he's a blind man, about 99% of his sight has been lost. But he was very self-reliant, and that's actually his most important wish. He doesn't care that he spends like an hour on the site of a financial institution to wrap up an insurance. But the fact that he can do so by himself without asking for help with anything that he does, that's important for him. And that's a good feeling of success whenever that works out. And then finally, it's good to realize how people use your product. So for example, he showed us in this workshop a few examples of emails that we wrote that could be better. He showed us the website and some of the quirky things that happen in there, but he also showed us the app. And every screen that he opened, the first thing that he ran through was the language selector, which is not even in a screen. It's hidden 3 layers deep into the navigation or 2. Something that we didn't even realize. So it's also good to have this on a very practical level. And the final thoughts on this is that it's important to do this top-down and bottom-up, sideways if necessary. It's extremely important that not just the teams that get to work on the products are really aware of the impact that they're making, but also management is aware of the fact that this is extremely important. And in not just monetary-wise, for example, but also what the impact is that you're making. And if you do all of this right, you end up in stage 2, anger. Accessibility is way too difficult and way too costly. And this is actually the phase where I kind of rolled in. I picked this up and I thought, well, I mean, we have our heart in the right place. This must be easy, at least to convince people that we want to do this. And one of the top managers that I work for told me, yeah, but it costs 1.5 times as much effort to actually create something that's accessible. And once you start doing this, then everyone just wants to focus on this completely, and people start going overboard, and everything they do is focused on this. And I was thinking, yeah, that sounds great. But it does mean that whilst you have the feeling that people start understanding why this is important, you have still a big gap to bridge there. And the first thing I did was corporate anger management, which is the same as regular anger management, minus the yelling, hopefully. So it means that you need to stay calm and to listen and to empathize. So for example, where do these feelings come from? And in the case that I just described, the manager had been a developer, I think 15 years prior. And they started working on accessibility in a time where it was, a bit less part of the whole movement. And he saw a lot of developers around him work way too hard on this, in his opinion. So it's good to know where these thoughts come from. Like, where does the number 1.5 times as much come from, How does he get that? Who told him that? And it's good to emphasize too, empathize too. Money is, for example, tight. We're actually in a time of budget cuts for the Dutch railway since Corona really put a damper on our revenue. So it's good to also keep in mind that there's other things that play there. And the thing that you can do is, well, first of all, get your facts straight. Talk to the teams. How much time will it actually cost to make this product more accessible? It's to highlight the benefits. What user group could we actually serve if we get this right? But most importantly, what helped me is to really collaborate on this, make it their problem too, or their challenge actually, and to agree on clear actions. These are the steps that we're going to take. You need to do this, and I will do this, and it will come together in this fashion and in this time frame. And it's good to define your challenge. So really dive deep into accessibility. Know what, for example, these guidelines, these requirements mean. Get a feeling for where you stand as a company. How far along are we? And apparently, we're not doing too bad, actually, at NS. But there's some glaring things that we seem to get wrong that we should just fix, And what really helped me, too, is to assemble a diverse team. So there was one person from the team accessibility. She has, a shit ton of knowledge about how does this work for which user groups, how can we get into contact, how can we do testing. The product owner of the design system team is involved. And one of the functional leads in our company is involved, who knows how to do politics really well, which is like a load off my shoulders. And it's good to get together with the team and to communicate a very clear goal and just repeat that over and over and over until everyone gets sick, but they do know what they're faced with, which leads to stage 3, bargaining. Finally, everyone seems to understand this is something that we'll have to do. This is something that we're gonna do. And then you get oh, okay, yeah, let's pick it up. So what stuff can we cut out, Which shortcuts can we take? And this is quite frustrating, actually. You get the feeling that you got somewhere, and then next question is, how can we make it less work? Do as little as possible. And one of the direct quotes I got here is someone saying, yeah, but we don't have to be like the best kid in class, But I think that's actually a really good ambition to have in this case. So what we did is, first of all, we mapped out the road to success. And what that means is, on the right, you kind of see the master journey that we set up. It contains every part, all of our customer journeys that you can possibly imagine that you go through if you travel with us. And we started by prioritizing the core services. So if you want to take a train, there's actually 2 things you really need to be able to do. You need to be able to book a ticket or to get a subscription, and you need to be able to plan your journey. And after that, it's up to you. So let's just at least start there, because if the company is moving, it's easier to get everyone along. And it's important there to allocate responsibility. So we cut everything up. We connected it to the customer journeys that we have. But then within these journeys, there's all these teams working on the different aspects of the product. So we appointed journey owners at this stage to really say, well, I know this is not all going to be fixed within your team, but you are responsible from now on to track how it's going. And another thing that really helped us got some expert advice in this area, what do we actually need to do? If you get a question, okay, so we have a business portal, that's B2B software, right? Can we just cut that out of the required stuff that we do? Yeah, I'm not sure actually. I mean, yes, it's business to business, but also there's, I think, like millions of travelers. They travel on a business card, but they're still the same people that could travel with their personal card. So why not serve them properly as well? And the second thing you can really do is align with other initiatives playing in this company, because bargaining goes two ways. So first thing we did is we looked at really big initiatives that we're running. So for example, we're kind of replacing the payment system. It's a nationwide change that we're going to make. And I think in London it's the Oyster card. We're going to replace that kind of technology with a different one. And we just spoke to people, can we get this as a requirement for all the buying processes, for example, that we're currently running? We aligned with the business portal that actually is going through a big iteration. Like, can we, even though it might not be a strict requirement, can we still make sure that this is included? And we make compromises. Okay, well, the deadline for this legislation-wise is June 2025. You're not going to make that with your new product, but let's agree that if you do this right in the new version you're building, you get an exemption from like polishing up your legacy code or products, which ends you up here, which is not a nice stage at all. This depression. You get the feeling that, you know, everyone is in line. We know what we're going to do. We know why we're going to do it. And then, for some reason, stuff just doesn't seem to happen, really. And that has to do with the fact that people start to feel that the challenge in front of them is overwhelming. I don't know where to start. There's just so much to do. I don't actually know what there is to do. I have the feeling that as an organization, we're still a bit within this phase, and I'll share with you why. But I'll also share some tips, and the first is to inspire, like get them basically out of bed. And we do that by showing and telling. So for example, one of the things we do is we try to be visible with these initiatives. And one of them is actually the Scouts principle, which states that you should always leave your campsite better than you found it. That's what I've been trying to tell people, that, you know, every time you open up this bit of code, and it could be like this tiny bit better for accessibility, then do it. And every time you open up the content management system and you find this page that has an image that's missing an alt text, just fix it up while you're at it. And every time you open up the design, even if it's someone else's screen, and you notice, like, I get the feeling that these contrast values are just not right, then fix it while you're at it. Like every time, clean it up just a tiny bit, and that gets you moving along. And then secondly, it's nice to create a community, because as soon as this topic gets prioritized, or in everyone's field of vision, might be the wrong expression here, but you notice that there's a lot of people that actually care a great deal about this. And the sooner that you can connect those people together, you can actually notice how a really small group of people can make this grow for the whole organization. And it's important to share success stories as well. So there's a few things we did. We upgraded our taxi booking workflow, which is actually, I mean, if you have a motor disability, for example, our stations don't lead to anyone's houses, actually. So that's a really important step to be able to take if you have a disability, to be able to get like the last mile transport sorted. But also, for example, the train that you see here, it was one of the first trains that really has the easiest way of getting in ever. Like, there's a platform that really perfectly aligns with the, what do you call that? Like the platform itself. So That's actually, and it's brilliant. It took a while to get these trains because, you don't replace them every year, but the fact that we do have them and it makes a lot of people very happy, that's a great win. And secondly, it's good to support and empower. So it's good to make sure that there's training available and preferably train everyone. I mean, I would love for the whole company, designers, product owners, content specialists, developers, everyone to be trained on accessibility and know what is expected of them. Unfortunately, that's quite a tall order if you want to do it all at once. But we did make sure that every team has at least one person that is trained on this topic, and that the people that are being trained are of different expertises. So one team has a trained designer, another team has a trained developer. So you create kind of a matrix of experts within your organization. Secondly, it's good to have a consultation hour because there are a lot of edge cases when it comes to accessibility. Like there's these crazy, you guess that most of the things have an answer on the internet, but as we saw earlier, area labels seem to be the answer for everything. Just add those. No, that's just not how it works in practice. So it's good to have like this consultation hour where people just can report in and say, I'm struggling with this. I need help. If you want me to work on this, I will, but please help me along when I'm stuck. And that's also what we did for the teams I mentioned that are working on our core services, really, for example, planning or buying a ticket. We made sure that they get like an expert team guidance. So we hire someone that comes in and consults for these teams and really helps them see how could you make your product better. And then finally, well, you create good documentation, which means that we finally get to see some zeroheight in my presentation. Now, there's a few things we arranged here. And first of all, it's important to get that why clear. Like, what is our vision as a company on accessibility? Why are we doing this? How do we look at this subject? What do we want people to do? And then secondly, and I think that's actually maybe less obvious, but it helped us a lot, is to give some tips on how to get started. Explain to people that, perfect is the enemy of good. Please just, here are some basic tips that can help you get started with this topic within your team. And that actually helped move things along a lot. So there's also a checklist that we added per role. There's another company that's actually a British company, I think Arriva or something, I'm not sure. But they have this really nice division of these different expertises. We kind of stole that at the end, build on it. Explaining, okay, as a designer, please keep these things in mind. These are the requirements or the success criteria that are in your domain. As a content specialist, please keep these things in mind. And by splitting it up, it's easier to get people moving along like, okay, well, at least the set has now been reduced for me. We do deep dives per topic. So for example, if these edge cases come along, we try to document like how do we want to approach this. And it's important to tell people where they can find help if they need it. Which ends you up finally in the blissful state of acceptance, where accessibility is integral to our workflow. Now, this is a stage marked by calm and serenity, but there's still work to do because we kind of get the feeling that we're getting there. We're seeing some ingredients, but we want to make sure that this is not a one-time thing that we do to comply to legislation. This is something that we need to do, that we want to do. So it's important to make sure that people can perpetuate this in the work that they do, to embed it in the operational processes that we have. That means integrating it into the definition of ready that we have, the definition of done, to make it part of the testing procedures that we have, to link it maybe to the customer effort score, or CPI, or, to make sure that you can monitor what's happening, but also to embed it into organizational processes. Make sure that it's part of hiring. Make sure that every vacancy contains a reference to the fact that people need to know what they're doing on this topic. And if they don't, that's also fine. But at least the people we hire, we know who to send to specific trainings, for example. Make it a hard requirement for our buying processes. And finally, it's good to anticipate on a training regime. Like we're doing these massive training rounds now, which is good. But we want to make sure that for the future, when people leave or change profession or team or move around in the company, that we're ready for that. And I think that the main takeaway for me in this whole process is to be there. I don't have all the answers. Actually, sometimes I have very little of the answers. I don't know exactly what I'm doing here. But it's important to be there for people, to listen, and to accept that all these emotions exist. It's okay for someone to be angry at some point in time. It's okay for someone to feel depressed when looking at this and these huge challenges that we have. But be there for them and listen and try to support them and try to think along with them and try to collaborate. So there's a few things that really helped us, and this is basically a summary of the things we've seen before, but involve as many people as you can find, bottom up, top down. Emphasize with as many people as you can, people with disabilities, people inside your organization. Make sure that you're clear. What is the challenge in front of us? Where do we want to be in a year, in 5 years? How important is this to us as a company? Make sure that it's top of mind by inspiring. Make sure that it's on the priority list, because it gets, like security, for example, it's something that constantly ends low on the priority list, and you have to really push or pull it up. And make sure that you arrange the right support so everyone that wants to work on this knows how to do it, and make sure that it's embedded. And I think Mary Pat Radabau really summarized it nicely. For most of us, technology makes things easier, but for a person with a disability, it makes things possible. Thank you very much.